Well, thanks for joining us today on H360 Health Talk, and my guest today is no stranger to Healthio360. If you've watched any of our past episodes, H360 Live, or if you watched any of the daily doses in the past, you'll recognize her as the person who is always by my side, Courtland Long. Well, Courtland, it's great to see you.
Good to see you, Dave.
So how is life after Healthio360? Let's get the small talk out of the way.
Well, it's not the same, of course, but life is good.
But you're doing some great stuff. You're working for a PR agency in the health space, so you're out continuing to promote health and wellness and working with some fantastic clients that are doing some pretty awesome things.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Awesome. Well, Courtland, I wanted to sit down with you today because, when we were working side by side, we really hadn't had a chance to really kind of take a step back and talk about your journey. Every day you would sit next to me in the office and we'd talk about how you were feeling that given day. But we haven't really taken a step back, and that's what I want to do this afternoon because there's so many people that I think can learn from your journey and the wisdom that you have. And I think, you've seen this play before, and you've seen it from all sides, from the Healthio360 side, from members that have joined Healthio360 looking for support, and now the story about your own journey with breast cancer. But, you and I for many years have been really advocates on the stump, talking about and advocating for early detection, because we know that if you can find a problem early, and not just cancer, but if you can find a problem early and detect it early, you have a better shot at getting through the journey in a much easier way. No journey is ever easy. I don't mean to minimize it, but if you can find that challenge or that issue a little earlier, I think patients have told us that they're better off.
Yeah.
Talk to me about you finding something that was wrong. Let's take a step back. That very first moment where you knew something wasn't quite right.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate that you talk about finding any kind of health issues early. As our good friend Fran Drescher says, catch it on arrival, 90% survival. And we've interviewed some people who have been major advocates of self-exams, and I know that we are as well. So for anyone, women and men, it's very important to pick a day once a month where you're doing self-exams. Men and women alike need to do breast exams, and men need to do testicular exams. And, I was doing this, and I found a lump one day in the shower, and kind of knew it wasn't really normal. It was very hard, and so I called my doctor and went in, and we took care of it.
So I want to step back. You make a good point. Pick a day a month, and I think it's more probably important for females because during that time of the month for a female, your breast can swell. They might not feel normal. So you want to try to pick a time during the month when you're not on your period or right before your period. Is that right?
Well, yes. So over the course of the month, with all the hormonal changes that are happening in a female's body, her breast tissue will change as well. So that's why it's so important to pick one day, because your breast can feel vastly different one day from the next. And so you don't want to potentially be feeling some, cystic tissue and kind of have a little bit of a heart attack about it when it's really not a problem.
Yeah. So when you felt that lump, you knew it wasn't quite right. You mentioned it felt a little hard. You knew something just wasn't the way it should be. So you're a very action-oriented person. I know that from working 4 years by your side. What actions did you immediately take?
So I actually felt the lump over a weekend. So the very next working day, I called my OBGYN. She's basically my primary care practitioner. And she said, you're really quite too young to be concerned about this, but come on in, we'll check it out. And so she, I think, thought that it was a cyst, and she knows that I'm proactive, and she's also very proactive. And she sent me across the street for some imaging. We did an ultrasound, and it just kind of kicked everything off from there.
So she said to you, you're too young, and we hear this quite often. I think back to you and I attending several of Dr. Weber's Colon Cancer Challenge Foundation's the summit, right?
Yeah.
And all of those young folks that we talk to and we interact with, they get misdiagnosed because their physician says you're too young to have colon cancer. So there's a message in there in and of itself, right? So don't ever let somebody tell you you're too young. And you, having been in the health space for a number of years, knew, first of all, you knew your own body. So you knew when you felt something that it wasn't quite right. And you weren't going to let anyone tell you, no, you're too young. That's not the right answer.
Absolutely. I mean, if my doctor hadn't been so proactive, I would have found another one. I would have gone to someone else who would have ordered those imaging tests for me and sent me for a mammogram and an ultrasound. And so that actually, it brings up a really good point. Your women's breast tissue varies in density. So for instance, I have very dense breast tissue. So mammograms are actually not the best first line of defense for me. But, we've got these insurance formularies and everything, so that's the step that I have to go through. But for some women, ultrasounds are better or MRIs are better, and it depends on your tissue.
Yeah, you kind of have to go through the step, right? So if your insurance company says you have to have a mammogram before anything else, you have to go through that hurdle and go through it. So let me ask you this: when your physician mentions, or you hear a physician mention that you're just too young, did you have breast cancer in your family?
Certainly. There's actually a couple different kinds of cancer that run in my family. Breast cancer is absolutely one of them. My grandmother is a breast cancer survivor, but we also have colon cancer, some ovarian cancer. I think a few others. It's been a little while since I had to do the very in-depth medical history, but I don't carry the BRCA gene, so that's why I think this was a little bit shocking.
Yeah. So let's talk about those steps that you went through. So you see your doctor, your first line is your OBGYN, who is your primary care physician, if you will, and then she sends you across the street. What happens there?
They did a mammogram, where that's when it came back that I have dense breast tissue. So at the time, I was 30 years old. And I probably would have started getting annual mammograms around that time because cancer runs in my family. And I think that's the guideline for women who have cancer in their family. So we did the mammogram, came back that you can't see a whole lot. And then because of that, we did an ultrasound. The radiologist was able to see a much more clear picture of the tumor and that there was blood flow to the tumor. And so she really wanted to do a biopsy that day. But you may remember that we were about to hop on an international flight to go over to, I think it was Vienna, for the annual ESMO Congress.
That's right.
We had to wait for the biopsy until we came back.
So when you had the mammogram, did you get the results that day, or was there lag time?
There was some lag time. They showed me the pictures, there that day, but you don't get like the written results for like a week or so after.
And so, what's going through your mind? So you see the pictures. There's about a week lag time. How are you staying focused? How are you kind of thinking about other things other than this image that you've seen of the mammogram of your breast?
Yeah, my situation was a little bit unique in that we work in the healthcare field, and we were at, one of the best places probably to be when you potentially have a cancer diagnosis coming down the pike. So I think I was able to stay focused through the ESMO Congress, knowing that if I had questions, I was in one of the best places where I could ask people, anything I needed. We've been going to these congresses for some time, so I think we both feel like we have some very close contacts within the oncology field through ESMO.
Yeah. Okay, so step number 1, mammogram.
Yeah.
You see the image that day. They show it to you. They say, well, we've got to send this out because a professional has to read it.
Mm-hmm.
So some time goes by, maybe a week, and then you get word back that step number 2 is, remind me again.
A biopsy.
The step number 2. So right after the mammogram, you went right into a biopsy.
Well, right after the mammogram, we hopped on the plane.
Right.
And then when we came back, I had my biopsy scheduled, and we did that, and then another week or so goes by because the labs have to examine it. And my OBGYN called me on a Friday evening, I think it was a Friday, and she said, it did come back as cancer. Mm-hmm. She referred me to 2 different breast surgeons, and I did go interview both of them.
Yeah. So let's talk about the biopsy for a minute. So you go in and they're going to biopsy it. What is that procedure like? Do they give you a little topical? Is there an incision made? Is it a very fine needle that goes into the tumor to take a biopsy? What was that like?
So there's a couple different kinds of biopsies that they can do. Mine was my first biopsy was an ultrasound guided biopsy. So you're laying on your side, you have your hand above your head. They're using an ultrasound probe to find the exact spot of the tumor, and then they do inject you with some numbing solution, and then it's a huge needle that they make just a little tiny nick in the skin and put the needle in, and it just kind of like snips out about 10 samples of tissue. Then there's a second, I think there may be actually 3 kinds of biopsy, but the second type of biopsy I had actually on the left breast was a vacuum-assisted biopsy, and so it's kind of the same thing where they'll numb the breast. This was actually an MRI-guided biopsy. So you're in the machine, they insert the needle, and it's a vacuum that kind of pulls the tissue into the needle, and then it slices out the sections that it needs.
But the tumor was in your right breast?
Correct.
And so then you snuck one biopsy in on me.
Yeah.
So why the biopsy in the left breast? What was the thinking there?
Well, so the timeline is getting a little bit jumbled up here, but that's okay. After I had made the decision to go to MSK for my treatment, because of my dense breast tissue, they wanted to have an MRI done.
I see.
And so when they did the MRI of both breasts, they found a suspicious spot in the left breast. And so then we came back and did another MRI and the guided biopsy, and that came back to be something called PASH, which is just, I forget what the whole name is, but the acronym is PASH, P-A-S-H. And it's really just kind of some, cystic tissue in the breast that is not really a major health concern.
So that's interesting. So you look at the 2 biopsies, the right breast, the left breast, did one take longer than the other, or or they kind of both the same? Was the procedure somewhat the same?
The procedures, they're somewhat the same. I mean, they're both image-guided biopsies. I would say they both took about the same amount of time. I mean, a breast MRI usually takes about a half hour. They inject you with some dye. And then, the ultrasound-guided biopsy also takes about a half hour. Mm-hmm. So fairly similar.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, between the time of biopsy and formal diagnosis,
Mm-hmm.
did you share what you were going through with your family?
Not at that time. Most of my family lives in Illinois. I live here in New York. I'm fortunate enough to have my brother live with me here. But I did not want to cause any undue strain or burden to my family and any undue worry, especially to my parents. So I did not tell them until I had a formal diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. So friends, other people in your inner circle, did you rely on them during that time?
Yeah, I think anytime when you live farther away from your family, having a very supportive circle of friends is very important. So I did have a couple close friends that I relied on very heavily. They would attend appointments with me. Of course, I relied on you as well. So I was very lucky to have a close circle of support here.
So we're, if I recall, we're in a meeting, late afternoon, launching a new solution for our community.
Yep.
And your phone rings in the middle of the meeting, and you lean over and say, "This is my doctor," and you step out to take the call. Mm-hmm. So this is going to be my version, and you can correct okay. Correct my version. And you come back in and you sit down and you pick up right where you left off about what we had to do and what the purpose of the meeting was and what we were trying to do in terms of launching new things for our community. But yet you were just told that the biopsy came back positive and in fact it's breast cancer. Mm-hmm. What goes through your mind at that point? I mean, you're pretty strong. I know that. But, how did you fully assimilate what just happened and what that phone call was all about? Or did you kind of hear some words and you came back in and sat down and went from there?
I think I did fully assimilate it. Of course, it's a shock, but I made no mistake about it. I knew that I was going to be in for a journey, as we call it. I think also from the work that we've done at HealthTalk, I was very lucky to have had the opportunity to interview so many people that have gone through similar things or worse things, and we've had someone come on the show and she said, a cancer diagnosis is scary, but it's not necessarily an emergency. And so I kind of relied on that very heavily because it takes time, to get your diagnosis, to find the doctor who works for you, to start your treatment plan. I was diagnosed in October of 2016, and I didn't actually start any active treatment until I think it was January of 2017.
It's really hard to believe that it's been that long.
Yeah.
October of 2016, mm-hmm. Right after we come back from the world's largest cancer conference in Vienna.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears for a minute because I think this is really, really important, what I want to discuss with you next. You said that your OBGYN referred two physicians, two surgeons. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that and tell me what were the things that you went through in selecting that one?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's my understanding, and I think it's very important for people to know this, that I think the treatment process for breast cancer is a little different than other cancers. So I think when you're diagnosed with some other cancers, your first step is to find an oncologist. And that is the person who gives you the chemotherapy medication. But for breast cancer, it's actually the surgeon who stages and types your cancer, gives you the formal diagnosis, and kind of creates your treatment plan. Pulls together the team of the radiation oncologist, the oncologist, anyone else you may need in your team. So my OBGYN gave me the name of two fantastic surgeons here in the city. I interviewed them. They were at two different medical institutions, and one was just a little bit of a better fit for me and where I'm at in my life and the kind of treatment that I needed. And so, I decided to go with her, but it's very important to find a physician who's going to deliver what you need.
So that's almost counterintuitive that your surgeon is really the conductor of the band.
Yep.
Because your surgeon is there to cut and to remove the tumor, but yet your oncologist is there for almost the duration, the full ride. They're there for your chemo, they're there for your radiation, they're obviously there for your surgery, post-surgery, follow-up treatments, and everything in between. So it's almost counterintuitive that you say that the surgeon, your OBGYN pointed you to a surgeon. Would you recommend that for women who are diagnosed that pick the best surgeon out that's right for you and then build the team around that?
Yes, I certainly would recommend that. As you said, surgeons mainly want to cut, and no offense to any surgeons out there, they're not necessarily well known for their bedside manner. So it was because in breast cancer it's the surgeon who, as you said, is conducting the band here. It was very important for me to have a surgeon who was going to take the time and explain whatever I needed over and over again. It was going to be available via email, phone call, whatever, and who was going to also take into consideration my lifestyle, my personality, my work and career and where I want to go in life, and pick for me the best oncologist and radiation oncologist who would fit within that picture.
Yeah. Well, Courtland, you hit a good point that sometimes surgeons don't have the best bedside manner. As you know, my brother-in-law, Dr. Jim's a surgeon, and his bedside manner, well, that is a story for another day. But I have so much more I want to talk to you about. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back with part 2, if you don't mind. Do you have time to stick around?
Sure.
There's a lot I want to dive into, from what your process was to going through and picking out your surgeon to taking people to your visits with you to help you out, and there's everything in between. So we're going to take a pause here. We're going to come back with part 2 with Courtland Long. That's Healthy 360 Health Talk.